Political parties have weighed in on the crisis of foodborne illnesses. The Democratic Alliance says government needs to bolster efforts to trace the origins of pesticides being used in spaza shop. Action SA wants spaza shops to be owned only by locals. Let's bring in a local governance expert. Dr. Harlan Cloete will give us some analysis on these various issues. Dr. Cloete, pleasure talking to you as always. Thanks for coming on to our program. And it's no surprise, I suppose, that these various crises that we're facing at the moment is also an opportunity for political parties to get in some points.
Good morning to you and good morning to your viewers. You know, I don't think it's a question of scoring points. I think it's about holding government to account. If you look at the nature of a political parties exist. The currency of political parties is power. So you're either in government or you are in opposition. And so your role as an opposition is to make sure that government delivers and that you keep government on their toes. And so they are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. I don't think it's as narrow as saying they're there to score cheap political points. It can sometimes get out of hand, but primarily the political parties, whoever's not in government, is in opposition, and they live to make sure that government accounts.
Yeah, sure. Do you reckon that that's how the electorate sees it as well?
I would think so, yes. I would think so, as long as they don't, you know, like you say, to score narrow, cheap political points or take it personal. If I have voted for a party X, for example, and I'm not in government, then I expect, you know, that is why political parties sometimes have shadow ministers. So there would be the day when they were not part of the government of national unity, for example, when they were the biggest opposition party. They had a shadow minister for education, for health, etc., for all the portfolios that mirrors that. And so their role is to make sure that the budget is spent and to inform their constituencies about what government is doing, because there is still very much a lack or a disconnect between what government is doing and what the community knows.
Yeah, absolutely. The crisis at the moment, I mean, we have multiple crises to choose from at any given time in South Africa. But for now, can we focus on the situation in Stilfontein with that disused mine shaft and the hundreds of miners that are underground? And then we'll move on to the pesticides and foodborne illnesses issue. How do you see it, Dr. Cloete? We heard in court yesterday two sides of an argument. One side arguing for humanitarian aid to reach the miners, the other side arguing that there is an escape route. The miners that are stuck underground are stuck because they don't want to be arrested. From the part of the community, there's also two different sides. One part says they've been terrorized by these illegal miners who operate in their communities. The other side says they actually benefit from the work being done by these so-called zamazamas who plow the money back into spaza shops, back into local shops in the community, and so on. How do we understand the story?
Look, I think for me, the point of departure is the rule of law. That is the first thing, is that there is a governance means that there's rule of law and there are certain regulations and certain laws governing how we manage things in our country. And so if people act outside of the law, then there is a problem and there has to be consequence. The problem sometimes is that we've got a lack of consequence. We see that in municipalities, for example. And so once you ignore the wrong in society, for example, it becomes culture and it becomes the norm. Then it becomes almost too late when you want eventually to act. And so we have to respect that we operate within the rule of law and we cannot allow lawlessness. On the other hand, you know, there's the humanitarian side, is that we are humans and there's a humanitarian way of looking at crisis. And so it's a complex issue and one hopes, you know, that so if we have the rule of law, and there has to be consequence for the zamazamas. If there's illegal mining, we need to bring a stop to illegal mining, because illegal mining didn't start in Stilfontein. It is becoming almost the law. And so we have a problem in this country when it comes to policing and making sure that people abide within the law. In the absence of that, you have lawlessness, and we can ill afford lawlessness. That is what we've seen within the construction mafia, for example. And if it spills over to other industries. There's been accusations, for example, at the taxi industry as well, that governments simply don't have the will to make sure that it holds them to account. And so lawlessness, we can never condone lawlessness in any form in this country.
Certainly. I suppose the thing that complicates the Stilfontein issue, and these are live visuals at the bottom left-hand side of your screen there, of the heavy machinery that's sending down a camera to get a better sense of what is underground. But Dr. Cloete, the thing that complicates the issue is that there are a number of people underground who are there against their will.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. One hopes for a speedy end to this, that we can resolve this, get the miners out, and make sure that this doesn't happen again, you know. And so we need to be learning. We can't be making the same mistakes over and over. And so what is happening in that area is a disaster. And from a humanitarian point, we must pray that we can resolve it as quickly as possible. But then, like I said, more importantly, that it doesn't happen again. What measures are we then putting into place so that we do not have a repeat of this?
Yeah, so the point of departure, you say, is the rule of law. I want to move on to the issue of the foodborne illness, the Disaster Management Centre declaring it or classifying it as a national disaster. I mean, the first kind of reaction from a lot of people, just given the number of children who have died as a result of eating contaminated food, was, gosh, finally.
Yeah. I think, again, there, you know, municipalities and the district municipalities, public health, that is their mandate and their concern. They issue permits for whoever would like to sell produce. So it does, again, also point again to our lack of, I think, enforcing the law, making sure that we police it, making sure that people not only comply, but there's regular checks and balances there. And so we need to clean up that, because sometimes it would appear, you know, and I've said this before, is that, you know, it is again unregulated. If you look at your more and more affluent schools, the school feeding or the where kids buy goods from, that is in a very highly controlled environment, especially within your urban centers as well. In the townships, you know, and I don't even like the name township, in your informal economies, it's almost like an anything goes. And unless, like I again said earlier, unless we regulate it and make following the rule of law the culture, we cannot have lawlessness. And this is the consequence of that. And again, like I said, if we cannot control this, it means that things will spiral out of control. And one child who dies is one too many. We cannot afford that our children die under our watch because of our lack of leadership and lack of governance and lack of consequence. Everything comes down to leadership. And so we've got wards in municipalities, we've got wall-to-wall wards, and we need to make sure we've got ward committees. And so we need to use data to make sure that there is consequence and that people are held accountable.
Yeah, it's about leadership, absolutely. But, it's also about service delivery, isn't it, Dr. Cloete? It's certainly about, doing those checks and balances, making sure that spaza shops are adhering to health regulations, getting this pesticide turbofos off of our local streets. It is a pesticide that is actually not licensed in South Africa, and yet they are found in the homes of South Africans buying it from wherever they buy it. But insofar as the service delivery issue is concerned, there's also the issue of a real lack of clean water and proper sanitation that must surely feed into this issue of foodborne illnesses.
No, I agree with you fully. In some communities, there are rats running a riot as big as dogs and cats. And so we have, I think in this country, although politicians may say it, if you look at our township schools, if you look at our township infrastructure, we have not invested sufficiently into our infrastructure. We are sending almost a clear message to the poorer communities that we do not care. So we can say one thing, we can say we care about the poor, we can say that we are serious about rooting out corruption, and yet our consequence, if you look at communities, municipalities, that is where democracy starts. Municipalities have an integrated development plan they've got local economic development plans, and yet we do not have these consequences. So I'm attending a performance management conference of the South African Local Government Association, and I think what came out at this conference, where I also spoke, was the dire need for ethical and accountable leadership, and to make sure that we reward good performance, and where there's bad performance, there has to be consequence.
Dr. Harlan Cloete is a local governance expert. Always a pleasure talking to you and getting your take on these